Across the country, leaders at all levels of government are trying to get a handle on an opioid epidemic that claims tens of thousands of lives each year. Oregon Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici has traveled around the state to hear from Oregonians on the front line of the fight: doctors, educators, law enforcement, and more. She joins us tonight to discuss what she found and legislation she'll introduce to fight the problem. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. The opioid crisis has a chokehold on many of our communities. Family, friends, co-workers, young and old. Addiction can take hold no matter age, race, socioeconomic background, location, or political affiliation. The opioid epidemic is taking its toll on human lives and on our economy. It's a crisis that affects all of us. Oregon 1st District Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici has been holding meetings across her district, listening to how opioid addiction is affecting people here in Oregon. And she's put together her findings in a report to help address the problem and to come up with solutions. Welcome to my guest, Oregon Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. Welcome back to Straight Talk to talk about this important topic.
Thank you, Laurel. It's great to be here and to share what I heard around Northwest Oregon about this crisis.
You've been holding these sessions all across the district in each of your 5 counties. Your report comes out on Monday.
Correct.
Give us the bottom line on what will be in this report.
I will. Thank you. And as you mentioned, I've been holding these listening sessions and hearing from people in recovery and healthcare providers and families. And I tell you, the stories I heard were just gut-wrenching and heartbreaking because this is a crisis that's affecting far too many people here in Oregon and across the country. So we're focusing on several issues on prevention. How can we have good evidence-based prevention programs? Treatment. There's a desperate need for more treatment and funding for treatment, which is a good investment. How we can come up with innovation for new ideas to help solve this problem. Disposal is a big issue as well. And I've introduced legislation to help with disposal because that seems to be a gap. And finally, we want to make sure that people can treat their pain. So what are some alternatives that can be used to treat pain that are not addictive, like opioids?
Well, we'll dig into some of those topics in a moment. Let's first talk about what opioids are. A number of opioids are prescribed by doctors for pain relief, and they include hydrocodone, oxycodone, morphine, and codeine. More than half the people who misuse opioids get them from a friend or a relative for free. 22% from a doctor. As tolerance increases, they may not be able to get the drugs from their original source, and that can lead to the black market and cheaper, more dangerous substitutes like heroin. And then we have a few statistics from Congresswoman Bonamici's report. 63,600 people in the U.S. lost their lives to opioid drug overdose in 2016. 3 Oregonians die each week from a prescription opioid overdose, and 30% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain will go on to misuse the substance. Those are pretty sobering statistics.
Absolutely. And as I listened to people across Northwest Oregon, I heard these stories that, as I mentioned, were heart-wrenching. You know, as a mom and a policymaker, listening to people like Carrie Strickland in Clatsop County talk about how her son Jordan had a sports injury, was prescribed opioids when he was in high school, and got addicted and fought the addiction for 7 years until he lost his life. And Brenda in Portland told us that her son was a football player at Portland State, again had a sports injury, got addicted. He also struggled with mental health issues, and he lost his life as well. And hearing from people who were just tragically turned away when they needed treatment. There was a woman who finally got into detox up in Columbia County. She made that commitment. She knew she needed detox. She got into the detox and she said, I'm ready for residential treatment. And they said, come back in several weeks. And that was so discouraging to her that she relapsed. She's doing better now, but stories like this, and from a woman in Portland who said that she was going to try really hard to set a good example for her kids and not abuse drugs, but then she had a C-section and was prescribed opioids for the pain. And like you said, Laurel, she got addicted and then turned to heroin. Again, she's doing better now because she was able to get some care and some treatment, but there are too many gaps, and there's still a lot of work to do.
Well, I know you do like to put a human face on this crisis with real stories about real people that you put into your report. And one of the people that you mentioned, the families, the Martinek family lost their son Taylor. He was the PSU football player you mentioned. He was 24 years old. He was prescribed opioids for a football injury. His dad, Brian Martinek, was an assistant chief with the Portland Police and also then the police chief of Vancouver. And he says the most important thing we need to change in society is the stigma. So let's listen to what he had to say.
And we try really hard, but we're like running up a sand hill with the way we treat people. The stigma associated to mental health issues and addiction issues is the #1 obstacle to people's recovery. That's the tragedy of it all. He was a wonderful, beautiful soul who loved unconditionally when he could, and who struggled with the ailment of addiction disorder, and his demons just got the best of him.
And that's really a key, isn't it? Looking at addiction not as a moral failing.
Right. It is not a moral failing. It's a healthcare issue, and we need to make sure that people have access to that healthcare and treatment. There are some great treatment programs out there. There's just not enough of them. When I was, again, up in Columbia County, they said they could fill pathways. They could fill another treatment facility. They just didn't have the resources to do that.
And then funding is a problem too for people who can't afford to go to one of those treatment centers.
Absolutely. But it costs more in the long run. If they're not able to work, if they're struggling with addiction, our safety net services are helping to keep them afloat, but at the same time, if we could get them into treatment and get them through recovery, then they can be working and contributing to the economy. So there's a lot of work to do here, but where I've identified a gap is with disposal. Because a lot of times people get way more pills than they need for if they get surgery and they have pain afterward, and these sit around in their homes. And it's staggering how many people are first exposed to opioids because they get them from a friend or family member. Now, police stations have some drop-off boxes, but to be honest, there are a lot of people who don't feel safe walking into a police station and saying, where can I get rid of the drugs I'm not taking? We need to not only increase disposal options, but have the companies that manufacture opioids participate in solving this crisis. When I speak with colleagues in the Congress who are physicians, they've told me, look, when we went through medical school, we were told that we can completely get rid of people's pain, and these products are not addictive. So these companies need to step up. And in my bill, the Safe Disposal of Opioids Act, we have a small fee that will be placed on opioids sold, and through that fee we will be creating an additional 10,000 disposal locations across the country to make sure that the unused opioids are out of people's homes.
And I read in your report that 50% of the people who are prescribed opioids report that they're not told where or how to dispose of the medication.
Correct. And we have some great work being done here. For example, Providence St. Vincent, we went to visit. They have a disposal box now at their pharmacy. They said when they opened that up, people were coming in with suitcases full of medication because people don't know how to get rid of them, but they need to be out of home. So this bill will help not only hold those companies accountable and have them participate in addressing the crisis, but make it easier for people to get rid of these.
Is it a problem when people flush it down the toilet?
Absolutely. That's not safe. It's not safe for the water supply.
You know, how big of a problem is this? We were talking about youth. How big of a problem is this for our youth?
It's a serious problem. When I've spoken with high school students, they say that there's a tremendous amount of access. So there's way too much use among youth. Many youth are prescribed opioids. We don't have enough research out there in education with providers about how opioids affect young brains. So I had a specific listening session about how opioid abuse is is affecting families and students. Now, there's some talk about a whole recovery high school opening in the Portland metro area, and in large part because of the stigma. When students are in recovery, they need to be supported by others who are in recovery. But we also have to be able to address the needs of students who are experiencing opioid abuse in their family. So making sure that they have those support services. We need more school-based health centers and more mental health treatment and counseling available in our schools for these students who are trying to overcome some big barriers.
Your report also says this is a big problem for employers, that 70% of employers are struggling in their workplaces from the effects of prescription drug and opioid abuse with absenteeism and that sort of thing. In February, you talked about it during a committee hearing on Capitol Hill, and you asked about alternative treatments for pain, which often aren't covered by insurance companies. Let's listen to that exchange.
And one of the issues that has come up frequently is alternative treatments. We have at our Oregon Health Sciences University a great pain management clinic, but oftentimes alternative treatments, whether it be physical therapy, massage therapy, acupuncture, they're not covered. And so they're not prescribed, and instead opioids are prescribed. So are there good reasons for employers to make sure these alternative treatments are covered in the plans they offer, and how could we expand the number of employers who are doing that?
Yes, absolutely. Employers should be involved and engaged in the insurance that they're offering to their employees and making sure that these alternatives are available. I think we've realized the risk of prescribing an opioid for chronic pain and the risk of addiction that occurs from that is very costly to that employer. And so making these alternatives available has a potential to save that employer money and is a better option for the employee themselves.
What suggestions do you have for employers to try to address this?
Well, employers should certainly look at the policies that they're offering to their employees. And importantly, we had in Congress a woman business owner from the East Coast, state hit hard by the opioid crisis, I believe it was West Virginia, say that her company, manufacturing company, she said, we hire people in recovery and we make sure that they can have a job and a safe place to work and that support system at work. Because they understand how important it is for people to have a job and a home. Housing and homelessness is an issue as well. It's hard for people to go through recovery when they don't have a roof over their head or an income. So again, it's addressing the stigma that you mentioned before. And making sure that people have those alternatives covered. We have some great biotech companies here in Oregon, and they're doing some additional research about non-addictive options to opioid use. So there's a lot of potential out there, but we need to make sure that this research, this treatment, these evidence-based prevention programs and disposal are funded, and I'm going to continue that fight.
Some of the new stats from the CDC looked at the period that ended last July, the 12 months, and it showed that Oregon was one of 14 states where the overdose death rate actually went down. Yes. That was encouraging news. And there's a new RAND Corporation report that looks at a possible link between states where there's medical marijuana and legalized marijuana and that reduced overdose death rate. Do you think that's a viable alternative to pain relief by opioids, the medical marijuana?
Well, again, we need to look at alternative treatments, and I know I'm very interested in this research and had heard about it, and we're going to be looking at trends in other states that have legalized cannabis to make sure that we're looking at all possibilities. So we want to make sure that people can treat their pain, but we're hoping that that happens in non-addictive ways, and so we'll be looking at that research, absolutely.
One of your colleagues over in the Senate, Patty Murray from Washington, and Republican Lamar Alexander are working on a bill over in the Senate, the Opioid Crisis Response Act. Are you seeing progress in Congress? Are you optimistic that you'll see some of these bills passed?
Yes, there has been progress. We passed the 21st Century Cures Act in the last Congress, and there's big steps taken there to help fund research and treatment, but we need more. There's obviously not enough. So we'll be looking at, of course, several bills that have been introduced in the House that are mentioned in the report.
We have a list of some of the bills that you're working on that will show people at home. A lot is going on. And President Trump has said this is a top priority of his administration to address the opioid crisis. And his administration says they want to see some action by next month ahead of the ramping up the midterm elections. Is that hopeful to you?
Well, it's hopeful. However, I am very concerned about a couple of things that the administration has mentioned. One of them is a Just Say No education program. We know that doesn't work. We need evidence-based education programs. And also, one of the president's platforms is death penalty for people who deal drugs. Do we need to crack down on the dealers? Absolutely. But this is not a problem that we can address by incarcerating people who need treatment. So, of course, there's overlap sometimes with the criminal justice system, but we must make sure that we're removing the stigma of addiction and getting people the treatment they need.
We look forward to seeing your report out on Monday. You'll hear more about that, but we're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we'll talk about Friday's student walkouts and the effort to reduce gun violence in schools. We're back in 2 minutes.